Hi, I'm Old Norse Specialist Dr. Jackson Crawford. In this video, part of my ongoing series of lessons in the Old Norse language, organized roughly in order of when I think people need to know things as we progress toward actually being able to read Old Norse texts, I'm going to talk about the verb to be. I am, you are, he is, etc. Because you can't get very far in any language without knowing how to say what is and isn't and what you are pretty early on. Now, I mentioned in the last video about some of the most basic classes of weak verbs that there are strong verbs and there are weak verbs in Old Norse. Well, now you've seen weak verbs, the basic types, and that's a good intro to verbs, but the most common verb in the language is to be, as it is in most languages. I guess there's languages that don't have a verb to be that get by in other means, and those are probably the only ones where it's not the most common verb. All right, so be is not a strong verb or a weak verb. Notice that in English it's pretty anomalous. And of course the verb to be in English and Old Norse is related, as we're going to see in some forms. It's really its own thing, so it deserves its own chapter and deserves very careful study because you're going to see these forms once a sentence often, right? All right, so present tense. Remember, this is going to be different from any other verbs, so don't try to apply these rules anywhere else. I am, ek am. Am, of course, very similar to Old Norse, to English am. You are, thu ert, very similar to English, thou art, much older English. Occasionally in manuals about Old Norse, you will see a form, thu est, cited as an archaic form of ert. Actually, one of my earliest publications, an article that I wrote for the journal Arkiv for Nordisk Philology, I argued that est, in fact, did not exist as an earlier stage of ert. You're never going to see it in any document in Old West Norse, and that it is just an occasional regionalism that you see in some Old East Norse. So don't worry about est, you're never going to see it in Old Norse. And then he, she, it is, Now, before about 1200, does have an earlier form, s, which of course looks like English is. You will most often see that not on its own, but abbreviated as just apostrophe s, much like you would in English. It's over here, right, with the apostrophe s standing for the word is. You'll see that, for instance, in very archaic poems like Havamal. But typically, even in very archaic poems like that, if the word is written out in its entirety, it'll be written out as still, because by the time the scribe is writing it down in the late 1200s, the word has become instead of s. When you see a lot of s in a text, you are probably looking at an edited text that somebody like, say, Verner has taken and tried to make look more archaic. You very rarely find cool documents that are actually written down in that old of a stage of Old Norse. You'll sometimes find something like a homily, right? Like the Stockholm Homily book, which is from about 1200, has a lot of s, but you're not going to find the cool stuff written that way. So learn it as but be ready to recognize it as s and apostrophe s in poetry. We are, ver erum. Y'all are, ver eruð. And they are, ver thar thou eru. Now, you can probably guess what's happened in terms of s. S has absorbed the r from the plural, right? Speakers must have felt that r is the mark of this verb and just by analogy introduced the r to the third person singular. We see something similar in the past tense. I was, ek var, but archaic ek vas. Now, of course, that's going to look like English was. But just like we've got the s in the singular in the present that's been replaced with an R by analogy to the plural, that's going to happen in the past tense too. So look for was and text written down before about 1200 and var afterwards. And of course, most of our texts, the sagas and the Eddas, are written in the 1200s, so you're going to see var. Second person, thu vart, you were, archaic thu vast. And then third person, he, she, it was, han, hon, that, var, archaic vas. In the plural, ver vorum, we were, their voruð, y'all were, their, thou, varu, they were. Now, why is it, incidentally, that you would see the R in the plural and the S in the singular? This goes back to this thing called Verner's law. And Verner's law governs what happens to S's in the Germanic languages. It's actually more than S's, but it's most visible in S's. When in Proto-Indo-European the stress came before the S or after the S. And in past tenses of most verbs, most strong verbs, and in the present tense of the be verb, the stress actually shifted from the root syllable to the ending syllable in Proto-Indo-European. So Verner's law has that S in the stressed root syllable staying as an S, but turning into an R in the plural when that root syllable was unstressed. Right, so ancestrally the forms wouldn't have been exactly this, but it would have been a situation like vas, varu, right, where that past tense plural has the emphasis on the second syllable, and that's what indirectly leads the S to become an R. This sounds weird, but English has this too. Is, are, was, were. That's a result of Verner's law. And curiously, actually, modern English is the only standard Germanic language that still has any remnant of Verner's law, because of course it gets analogized out in Old Norse by about 1200. You get var, voru instead of vas, voru. Old Norse has some more examples of this. We'll mostly see it in strong verbs. So keep Verner's law in mind. It's going to mean that now and then you're going to see S's and R's interchange. One of the other very few places you'll see it is in the word Valkyria, right? Very famously means chooser of the slain. But if you actually look up the word choose in Old Norse, you're going to see kjosa. Well, the Kyria in Valkyrie is the same root, but it's been Vernered because the stress used to be on the syllable after the S was turned into an R. All right. I'm going to give you some exercises at the end of this video. The answers to the exercises will follow on a different screen. And if you need further clarifications, want a few other exercises, pointers, that kind of thing, of course, you are welcome to contact me on Patreon if you're a supporter there. For now, from the most beautiful place in the world, the Never Summer Mountains of northern Colorado, I'm wishing you all the best.